Hello, and welcome to the Sovereign Collective podcast, where we bring you real, raw truth for your self-empowerment. I'm your host, Sasha Calavoda, and I believe that you can stand on your own 2 feet, but that you don't have to do it alone. I love learning from people who continually strive to raise the bar, to go against mainstream thinking, and who dare to question the general consensus. People who risk being ridiculed or even risk the loss of their professional status as they bravely question the common narratives and challenge the rest of us to expand our minds and to reconsider what we think we already know. Join me in learning how to take control of your health and your mind so that you can have the energy to think more clearly and the confidence to step up and take responsibility for all aspects of your life. We promise to never censor here because I believe you are strong enough to hear the real, raw truth to make up your own mind. If you like what you find here at the Sovereign Collective podcast, then please share with your friends and family. And please also consider making a small donation on my Patreon page so that I can continue to bring you amazing content so that we can all create a better future. I so appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. And now, on to the show. Hi, y'all. This is Sasha here for 2 quick announcements before we get on to our interview for today. First of all, if you are looking for quality supplements, quality tonic herbs, some specialty food items, and you're in and around Calgary, then please go check out Lotus Herbal Health, a great family-run store that has 2 locations in Calgary. You can find them at lotusherbalhealth.ca to find out where their locations are, or you can shop online and they will pretty much deliver anywhere. So quality supplements, tonic herbs, great staff. Check out lotusherbalhealth.ca. Secondly, I want to announce the relaunch of my program called Your Conscious Pregnancy and Parenting Guide, which consists of experts in their fields around the world on consciousness and parenting and education and nutrition and dentistry and homeopathy and more. This is a program I created after my son was born about 10 years ago, a little bit more than that. And I am now very concerned after the events of 2020 for our future generations. And I believe the time is now for conscious parenting and for conscious parents to rise up and take back our pregnancies and our births and our parenting and the resilience of our children and of future generations. The time is now. We change the course of history by changing the course of our future generations. And we do that by consciously raising them, consciously birthing them, consciously conceiving them, feeding them good food, and taking back the responsibility of raising healthy, well-adjusted, robust people. Resilience. It's time to build resilience. So please go check out sovereigncollective.org/get the guide, sovereigncollective.org/get the guide, and you will be able to check out all of the amazing material in there. And for now, at the time of this recording, it is at the ridiculous price of $47 US. It will be at that price for a little while longer, but not for too long. So this is January 2021 when I'm recording this. So if you are hearing this much later, it won't be that price anymore. But if you've heard this earlier, it is that price. And it is well worth it. It's time for us to understand how our worldviews are formed, how our self-views are formed, and how to impact that and how that impacts the society on a whole. So check it out, sovereigncollective.org/get the guide. And now on to the show. Hi, everyone. It's Sasha here with another interview for the Sovereign Collective podcast. And today I am here with Dr. Bob Dickson. He is quite a warrior in our city of Calgary for a very important cause. So let's get into, first of all, a little bit about his bio, and then we'll tell you about what we're talking about today. So Dr. Bob, he's the past president of Change for Children, past president Tools for Peace, and past chair of the board of directors of Arusha Cross-Cultural Center. He was a senior partner with Results Canada with the mandate to end starvation, debilitating diseases, and poverty globally in support of the Millennium Development Goals for many years. He was instrumental with Results Canada in mandating that maternal and child health be the signature initiative of the 2010 G8 G20 Forum in Toronto, and in the ensuing announcements of $1.1 billion and later $3.4 billion for maternal and child health committed by the Canadian government for these programs. As well, he volunteers with Medical Mercy Canada, most recently in Thailand, with the Burmese refugees and in Nepal, and is on the board of the 4 World Center for International Development. Dr. Dickson co-led the anti-fluoridation program in Calgary from 1999, which resulted in water fluoridation being halted in 2011. Took a long time for that, and continues to actively volunteer with the issue of artificial water fluoridation. He is the founder of Safe Water Calgary and launched their new website, www.safewatercalgary.com, in 2017. Dr. Bob has actively partnered with Project Ishkanan. Am I saying that right? Ishkanan?
Ishkanan.
Ishkanan. Okay. Since 2003 to rebuild and support the remote village of El Remate. I'm going to say this wrong. Remate in the Pitan province of northeastern Guatemala. He has worked diligently on climate change issues with 4C, Calgary Citizens on Climate Change, since 2015, meeting and interacting frequently with elected officials and senior administrators in the Calgary Civic and Provincial New Democratic Party governments. 4C hosted a successful federal climate change forum, has authored white papers on climate issues, and brought George Marshall from Climate Outreach in the UK to Calgary for a series of workshops to promote respectful communication. So, Dr. Bob, you're a father, you're a warrior, you're a doctor. You were a family physician, yes? And semi-retired, retired now?
Still, I'm a family physician, still licensed in the province of Alberta. I retired from my family practice about 7 years ago in Market Mall, and I still work minor emergency and walk-in when I am in Calgary. And it's a fairly good job because I just work usually 1 day a week, and then I get 4 months off in the winter to go somewhere warmer like Mexico, where I am now.
Nice, nice. Well, life is good. Well, you've been very active, very busy, very intentional, it seems. So thank you for sharing your time with me today on this very important topic of water fluoridation, a topic that we are faced with again in Calgary. It just keeps coming back. I don't understand it, but here we are again. So you're an important figure in this plight for safe water. So thank you for what you are doing.
Thank you for having me, Sasha. Much appreciated. We have to get the word out.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So let's talk. Okay, so before, you've got some points you want to make. You've got we're going to, for the people that are listening today, we're also going to have a presentation that you can find on YouTube, but I'll provide the link somewhere for it, I think, so you can access it as well if you want to see it for yourself. But before we get into these points around water fluoridation, I just want to get into a little bit about the history of fluoridation, why it came to be, where it came from, when it all started, and then we can go from there. So can you enlighten us on the history of water fluoridation?
I can do that. Actually, we wouldn't have to do any of that. All we have to do is just say one thing: follow the money. And if you do that, you can understand everything about water fluoridation and why it's still here. Anyway, just a brief history. So it goes back into the 1930s, really. And at that point, there was a discovery that people had brown teeth somewhere in Colorado, and a dentist discovered that, and he found out that actually it was fluoride, natural fluoride in the water, that was causing these brown teeth, and these brown teeth actually had fewer cavities. And so that morphed into the aluminum industry at the time, in the late 1930s, having a problem with hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is a waste product scrubbed out of their stacks, or supposed to be scrubbed out of their stacks. At that point, it was making a lot of people ill and sick, and also the animals and plants around their factories were getting ill and sick. So the aluminum industry needed a way to whitewash fluoride, and so they partnered with these dentists and decided that they would put their waste product into public water. And the mainstay of that program developed through the latter 1940s with some studies that were in both Canada and the US. And they cherry-picked the information from that, manipulated the studies. And by 1950, the early 1950s, there was actually edicts coming out across Canada and the United States that this was one of the best things that's ever happened for children and for dental health. And so Edward Bernays, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that name, Edward Bernays. He was the grandson of Sigmund Freud. And he was the propagandist master of the 20th century. He actually wrote the book called Propaganda, and it was Edward Bernays, Bernays, who actually convinced doctors and dentists that smoking was good for women, especially when they're pregnant. That started in the 1930s. Very successful with that, so they hired him for the fluoridation program. And he said off the record at one point that the easiest thing that he ever did in his entire propaganda career, and he was very successful at it, was to convince doctors and dentists that fluoride and fluoridation was good for children. And that has persisted. That's been the mainstay of the program since the 1950s. So fast forward a little bit, we've had in Calgary 6 referendums about fluoride, or plebiscites as they're now called. The first one was started, I believe it was in 1957. So in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we had 4 plebiscites that defeated water fluoridation, narrowly, not by much, but they did defeat it. And then we had 2 that passed it, the first in 1989 and the second in 1998. So the first one that passed fluoridation by, I believe it was 53 to 47%, actually ended up 2 years later in fluoride being put into Calgary's water in 1991. So it was the first time Calgary had been fluoridated. It was 1991. It took them 2 years to build all the infrastructure. It's highly toxic, and so it has to be very carefully put together and distributed. Edmonton, on the other hand, has been fluoridated since 1967, Red Deer since 1959, Lethbridge since around the same time as Edmonton, 67. So a number of Alberta cities still are fluoridated. Those 3 for sure. Grand Prairie as well is still fluoridated. But if you look across Canada, less than 40% of Canadians are fluoridated, as opposed to about 74% of Americans in the United States that are fluoridated. So they have about twice the number per capita fluoridated as we do. So 1998, we were still fluoridated in Calgary, and there was a lot of activism going on the streets in the grassroots. And so another plebiscite was called, and also an expert panel was struck at that time. And if you ask the pro-fluoridationists to put together an expert panel, guess what's going to happen to the outcome? If you ask the anti-fluoridationists, if you ask me, if you ask many of the scientists that are involved in the Safe Water or anti-fluoride program to put together an expert panel, guess what had happened? It would never be in. So anyway, the expert panel recommended that we continue fluoridating, but just lower the concentration a little bit. And that was the last we heard for quite some time. I actually voted for water fluoridation in 1948 as a family doctor. I had so many things on my plate, and I wasn't able to study everything that came across. So I trusted the authorities, the powers that be, the medical and provincial officers of health. And they had very glitzy presentations and pamphlets and whatever promoting fluoridation as the next best thing to sliced bread. And so I voted for it. Afterwards, friends came to me and said, "Why did you do that, Dr. Bob?" And I went, "Well, I trusted the authorities." And they said, "Well, have you looked at the literature?" And I said, "Not so much." And they said, "Well, you probably should." So I took that as a personal challenge, and I looked at the literature and essentially said, OMG, when I was finished. I said, how could we ever be doing anything like that to our general public and to our children, and even to unborn children? So I said, well, what do I do now? I should do something about this. I can't just let this rest now that I know what's happening. So I took it to Dr. James Beck, Dr. Jim Beck, my dear friend, who's now retired from the University of Calgary. He was one of my profs in the 1980s in medical school in Calgary. And I went to Jim and said, "Jim, would you mind having a look at this? You're a PhD, MD, you're a researcher, you know a lot more about this sort of thing than I do." And he said, "Oh, I'd gladly do that, Bob." He was retired then, so we had lots of time. And so a couple of weeks later, I went back to him, and Jim said, "Gosh, Bob, how," basically he said, OMG, the same thing as me. "How could we ever be doing this?" And so I said, "Well, Jim, why don't we kind of team up and see if we can do something about this?" And he said, "No problem." He said, "We should have this done in a few months." Well, make a long story short, it took us to 2011 to get it turned off in Calgary, along with a lot of our grassroots activists as well. And we're not taking sole credit for it, but we led the city council side, the sort of professional side, meeting with the deans of medical schools and the medical officers of health and such.
What year did you start it in again? What year was that? 1998, did you say?
1999 is when we first started, when I talked to Dr. Beck and we started our program. So after voting for it in 98, a year later, we started our program. Yeah. And we persisted. Jim did the majority of the work. I was his right-hand man, so to speak. And we got the taps turned off, the fluoride taps turned off in 2011. City Council has been taking a lot of flack for that ever since. And so the pro-fluoridation is, I've been working since about 2013, working very actively and aggressively to get fluoride back in our water, to turn on the fluoridation taps again.
So are these more
So
people that are profiting from that, or they're regulators, or it's not the people of Calgary, is it? Like, who are the ones that are giving them flack?
it's primarily Calgarians for Kids Health, which is a euphemistically named organization led by Julia Guichon, who's an ethicist at the University of Calgary and at the medical school. She's put together this group of lawyers and dentists and engineers and whatever. They're registered as a charity. They get a lot of funding from some of the wealthier folks in Calgary, and they are the ones that have been putting up some of the street signs. You might have seen those portable billboards that say, City Council, Calgary's kids, their teeth are falling out of their heads, put fluoride back in our water, and other such things.
Wow.
So they've been the main ones that are pressuring City Council. And Juliette gets, if you've seen any of the op-eds or opinion pieces in the Calgary Herald and other papers, that's her. She's getting a lot of press with the radio and TV organizations as well. And she's just a buzzsaw, very persistent. And so she gets a lot of press and puts out a lot, unfortunately, a lot of false information. Says things like I could drink 10 swimming pools worth of fluoride and it wouldn't even affect me. And well, it wouldn't affect her because she'd be dead. She wouldn't have anything to say about it.
Wow.
But, stuff like that, that's just so erroneous, and she just pulls things out of thin air, and it's very sad. She's also taken me to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, trying to take my license away along with other members of her group.
Wow.
And so that is ongoing for the last 2 years now, and very stressful. If someone threatens to take your livelihood away and something you've worked at for 40 years, it's hard.
Of course.
So anyway, that kind of encapsulates what's happening in Calgary. 2017, they tried to get it back on the initiative with our civic election. That failed. And then 2019, they snuck it into City Council and got the ball rolling there. And that ended up in the O'Brien Institute of Public Health and Dr. William Gawley leading a review of all the fluoride literature and putting a major report into the city of Calgary in July of 2019. And a week before that, we put our Safe Water Calgary report in. Both reports are very good. They're both worth reading. They're both in about 20 some pages long. And they're both available on our safewatercalgary.com website.
Safewatercalgary.com. Okay. Okay. And so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's basically the history, unless you want to know anything more in detail about the history. If not, I'll go into our basic facts and figures about water fluoridation.
So we are, just to bring us up to today, we are facing another plebiscite this year. I heard somebody say that it might not even go to plebiscite, that it might be just voted on in council, which is a horrifying proposition. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but somebody who knows one of the councilors suggested this might be the case, which I find is a terrifying proposition. I mean,
absolutely, and you should be terrified by that, because it's voting to whether you can medicate your neighbor or not, and your neighbor can medicate you, which is totally entirely unethical, and it's just lacking in so many scientific and whatever basis. So so in October of 2019, we had a major forum, about a 12-hour forum at City Hall with city councilors, and I flew in people from different parts of North America, real true experts. Dr. Galley presented his report from the O'Brien Institute of Public Health at that time to City Council. And out of that came a motion to determine whose jurisdiction fluoridation was. Is it civic, is it provincial, or is it federal? And the second part, I mean, I can tell you that in 5 seconds, the jurisdiction is civic. It always has been. And province and feds don't want to have anything to do with it if possible. Although there's a lot of pressure for them to do so. And the second part is, how much is it going to cost? Well, back in 2011, that was one of the reasons we got it turned off in 2011, because it was going to cost $6 million to rebuild the infrastructure that fluoride eats through and wears out. And so we thought, well, it'd probably be $6 million. Well, they hired an external consultant to do a study, and that external consultant came out with a figure of $30 million over the next 10 or so years to reinstate, to rebuild all the fluoride infrastructure in our two major water plants, and to do all the training and all the ancillary materials, to buy the industrial scrubber waste from the fertilizer industry in Florida or China, and just to keep the whole system rolling. So I think it's over 20 years amortized. So yeah, $30 million to put it back in. So that's what City Council actually looked at last month. And then this month they actually came up again, and they voted not to restart fluoridation, which they could have done just carte blanche. They could have started it and said, yep, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, they voted on that. They could have said, we're starting it tomorrow. And it would have taken a couple of years to rebuild it again, but they could have voted to do that without any public mandate, even though the first four plebiscites, as I mentioned, defeated it, and the last two passed it. Plebiscites are not binding to anybody at any given time.
Clearly. So
they could have voted to reinstate it there, or they could have voted to do nothing, or they could have voted to have a plebiscite. And so they decided to take the easy way out. Plebiscite is basically they're washing their hands of it. City Council does not have anything to do with fluoridation anymore until October election. Probably half the councillors will be gone by that point, and the new council will have to deal with it starting in November of this year, because it will be an issue. And they won't have to deal with it. Well, they'll still have to deal with it no matter what the vote is. So medicine by plebiscite, as mentioned, is a very poor way to do medicine. It's medicating, it's voting to medicate your neighbor, your family, your friends, people you don't know. And it's highly unethical. So if it passed, which they have on their side, the pro-fluoridationists have the money, they have the press, totally have the press, and they have probably the majority of the public right now, I'd say 53 to 55%, if we voted right now, would vote for it, because people just don't know. Right. But we have the science, we have the common sense, and we have the little David fighting Goliath. So we have a lot of energy and
okay, well, there's other issues that seem to have the science and the common sense, and they're still battling, but we won't get into other things. Okay, well, good. Well, why don't we get into your presentation then? We can see what facts and figures with us.
So I'm just gonna run through some water fluoridation basics here, and they are available on our website, safewatercalgary.com, as well. And basically, they are, all citizens have the right to safe, clean, and unmedicated water. So that's a basic human right, and we should all be standing up for that, and for other reasons too at this particular time in our history. Fluoride itself is highly toxic, so it's not ethical to force a toxic substance on people, no matter which way you do it. People can use their toothpastes or fluoride varnishes or rinses or whatever, but to mass medicate everybody with fluoridation denies the right of choice and informed consent. If you come to me as a doctor, I have to inform you what I'm going to possibly treat you with, and you have to agree to that.
Well, very important point. Inject there quickly. So people are saying, well, it's in our toothpaste. It's in the dentist gives me fluoride trays. How could it be toxic if they're doing that? How can you say that it's toxic, Dr. Bob?
Because you don't swallow it, you spit it out, you rinse it out. The dentists tell you to thoroughly rinse 2 or 3 times. You rinse after you swallow, or after you brush your teeth. You have your kids not swallow their bubblegum flavored toothpaste, highly toxic. And in my PowerPoint that I'll show a little bit later, there's a picture of a tube of toothpaste that explains that point quite well. Okay. So very important, fluoride is not necessary for one single body function, not necessary for anything. If Elon Musk took all the fluoride to Mars, we'd have a much happier planet, because Elon Musk would be gone, but also because we don't fluoride anymore. So fluoride delivers it. It's a very poor way to deliver a medicine. It's like swallowing a pill if you can put something on your skin. If you swallow the pill to treat this thing on your skin or in your ear, it goes to every organ, every cell, every system in the body to reach that ear or that thing on your skin. So if you can put something topically on your skin or put a drop in your ear to treat an ear infection, it's much better than taking a pill that treats your entire body. And so fluoride, since it's swallowed, fluoridation is swallowed, it affects every cell, every organ, every system in the body. So it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it gets into the brain. It's highly neurotoxic. It crosses the placental barrier, so it affects the unborn baby. While the baby's developing in the mother, it affects that baby. And that is highly important. And the pro-fluoridationists just do not ever address that. But it's being proven more and more with the new science. And again, I'll address that in the PowerPoint if we have time for that. So another highly important point that the fluoridationists do not address is that when medicine is delivered by water, there is no control of dose or dosage. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
I think so, because we're all drinking the same glass of water, but we have babies and adults all drinking that same amount of water. All.
Very good. The same amount of fluoride.
Right, same amount of
So
fluoride.
you have a better understanding of this than the experts that are on the pro-fluoride side. So they control the concentration, and that's a good thing. I mean, you don't want to have a concentration that's all over the map. So the concentration has come down from 1.2 parts per million to 1 part per million to 0.8 parts per million. Now it's 0.7 parts per million. Some places are advocating for 0.6 parts per million. We have naturally calcium fluoride in our Bow River and Elbow rivers of 0.1 to 0.3 essentially parts per million. But that's calcium fluoride, which is maybe bound a bit more tightly and isn't released so much in the human body. They are putting in hydrofluorosilicic acid out of the fertilizer stacks, as I mentioned, the scrubber waste stacks in Florida and China. And that comes along with other things like arsenic and lead and mercury and strontium and bromine and other unsavory things at trace doses, but they still bioaccumulate in the body. But if you come to me as a doctor, I'm going to give you a specific dose for your specific body weight. So a person that weighs, you're probably say 100 pounds. If a person weighs 200 pounds, they need a different dosage than you.
Right.
So the dose that we get is, as you mentioned, the amount that we swallow per glass of water. That's the dose that you get. So it might be, 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, whatever per day. The dosage is the amount of milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So if you drink 10 glasses of water and I drink 10 glasses of water, you're getting twice the dosage because you're half my weight.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And as you alluded to, babies get a much higher dose because if they're drinking a fair bit of water, and they do drink a lot when they're babies and infants, if they're drinking a lot of water, they're getting a much higher dosage. So as you go down in size of people, you're getting much higher dosages as you get smaller and smaller, and particularly babies, infants, and then the placenta as well. Mm-hmm. And in breast milk, there's virtually no fluoride in there. But babies that are fed formula from fluoridated water get up to 200 times the amount of fluoride as is in mother's breast milk.
Wow.
Important point. So as we alluded to earlier, there's much better ways. If you do believe in fluoride and you want fluoride, put it in the city water, no one has choice. But if you brush your teeth with it, you have choice. If you go to your dentist and get a rinse or a gel or a foam or whatever and spit it out afterwards, that's your choice again. So there's so many good ways to get fluoride, even supplements from the doctor that are super cheap. If you believe in fluoride and want fluoride, you can have it. But to mandate that everybody should have it is absolutely wrong. Mm-hmm. If you look at the pro-fluoridations, particularly Calgarians for Kids' Health, they're making it sound like Calgary's is an exception, like we were just these stupid people and stupid council that took this wonderful, safe, and effective treatment out of our city water, and everybody else in the world is doing this. That is abjectly false, because over 97%, actually it's 98% now of British Columbia, 98% of Quebec are not fluoridated. Not fluoridated. Canada, about 38% fluoridated. Ontario leads the way of fluoridated provinces at around 71%. But 97% of Europe is not fluoridated. 95% of the rest of the world is not fluoridated. So we are by far in the majority in Calgary right now not being fluoridated. Yet they make it sound like we're just this outlying, we're these bad boys and girls that have just taken this safe and effective treatment and said, no, we don't want to do that. So most of the world's not fluoridated. Let's keep it that way. There's almost 5,000 professionals now that have signed on to the Fluoride Action Network, FAN's letter, open letter for professionals. So almost 5,000 professionals have had the courage to sign on to that. And I say courage because anybody that comes out anti-fluoride is immediately labeled in the press and in professional organizations as aliens, 10 hatters, anti-science, pseudoscience. I've been called all those things in the local press and the national press and papers and editions all over Canada over the last 20 years. But there's a lot of professionals that have the courage to stand up. And one of those organizations is the IAOMT, which is the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, which comprises over 1,000 dentists and researchers and toxicologists, many from the United States, but some from Canada too. And they have come up with some powerful position papers. The last one was in 2017. IAOMT, definitely worth Googling and looking at that position paper, because these are dentists, and people say, oh, you know, every dentist in the world is for fluoride. Well, the dentists that aren't knowledgeable and haven't studied the issue are pro-fluoride, but those that have studied it and looked at the inner workings of fluoride, or fluoridation in particular, are not. And it makes a lot of money for the dentists. A dentist can make six-figure salary without ever seeing a patient, just by sending them to the hygienist for fluoride treatments.
Really? Isn't that
Other
fun?
options available, Child Smile Program. We should be following the Scottish Child Smile Program. And it's one of the best programs on the planet. And what they did is 2001, they saw that there's a lot of cavities and caries in their kids. And so they developed a program, a pilot, that is now morphed around a lot of parts of Scotland. And so they have now some of the healthiest, not only teeth and oral health, but total kid health, because now they teach kids from 3 years old and up how to brush, how to take care of their mouth, how to drink their water properly, unfluoridated water. They don't have fluoridation in Scotland. And they teach them about diet too.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they go home and teach their parents, and then everybody's eating healthy. There's less diabetes, there's less cardiac disease, there's, you know, on down the list, less obesity. So Scottish Child Smile Program, very effective. And just a last point I'll throw in here is that 99% of fluoridated water is not consumed. So if you came to me as a patient and I gave you 100 pills and I said, Sasha, go home and take one of these pills and throw the rest into the Bow River, you'd go, Dr. Bob, I think I'm going to go find another doctor. But that's what happens with water fluoridation, because 99% of it is used for flushing toilets, watering lawns, washing cars, you know, cooking, whatever, industrial uses. It's not used to medicate. It's not used to treat. So you're wasting 99% of your medication. So we could probably do a little bit better, a little more effective treatments with our money.
Right.
So that's my water fluoridation basics. Would you like to get into a PowerPoint now, or where would you like to go with this?
Sure. Well, I'd love to really get into, if you can talk about the dangers and the toxicity and what it causes. Is that going to be in that presentation?
It is somewhat, yeah. And we could certainly embellish on that as we go through the slides, if you like.
Because I would like
that is important.
Pardon?
That is important. That's highly important.
I think people need to understand why they should vote one way or another when plebiscite comes, or if it ever comes up in somebody else's city. I think that's a really important part of it, because I mean, we hear about, you know, the fluoride in the pineal. We know about dental fluorosis in the bones. Like, people need to know, why do I not want this? If they're telling me it's safe, why can't I believe them? So I think it's important if we can get into some of that. So we can get into and maybe embellish on that if you want to. If we could do it that way, then that will work for me.
We could quickly just state right now the organs and systems that it affects, and then get into it more as you go through the PowerPoint. And you can just go head to toe. You mentioned the pineal gland in the posterior part of the brain. That is calcified by fluoride and fluoridation. And the pineal gland is essentially the seat of the soul, and it's a very important decision-making and functional portion of our brain. And it's calcified by fluoridation. It's neurotoxic. It's now a proven neurotoxin, especially with the 5 studies that have come out of the University of Toronto and York University in the last 3 or so years. And so, the NTP report, the National Toxicology Program out of the States, just came out with their final draft last week. And that is showing that it's the highest level of neurotoxicity. So it's a proven neurotoxin equivalent to that of lead. Now, if someone said, yeah, let's add some lead to the water because, you know, it helps with something or another. Well, I don't care what it helps for. You're not going to add lead in the water because we know the harms that it does, and it's taken us 70 years to get it out, to get the lead out, so to speak.
Mhm.
So the same thing is happening with fluoride. It's more and more science collecting, and it's a neurotoxin. It's now a shown neurotoxin. It also affects the thyroid gland adversely. It's a thyroid enzyme toxin. It affects the heart adversely, the kidneys. If you have any sort of kidney disease at all, don't go anywhere near fluoride. It affects the gut microbiome. It makes bones thicker, but more easy to fracture, more fragile. We used to, about 60, 70 years ago, as physicians, we used to treat osteoporosis in women with fluoride, and then because the bones were bigger. And then we found out that they were more fragile, so we quit that really quickly. It affects teeth adversely as well. It makes them harder. As it says, it makes them harder. Our kids' teeth are like butter now that we don't have fluoride in the water. Well, it makes them harder, but it makes them more easier to fracture as we age too. It has no benefit for adults or the elderly, and is detrimental to all the different organs and systems that we just talked about. So that's in a nutshell the bad things that it does.
What about a developing fetus?
Well, as I said, it crosses the placental barrier. So that's primarily where the neurotoxicity comes from. And that's where you get things like decreases in IQ from 3 to 9 points, according to the various studies. The higher end is when you're mixing, as I mentioned before, the formula with fluoridated water. You can get up to a 9 IQ point loss. That's Canadian figures with Canadian levels of fluoridation, and Mexican and United States, some in the United States as well. Loss of IQ and tripling of ADHD. We don't have enough ADHD, ADD, and ADHD in our society, so we got to triple it by putting people on fluoride. Tripling.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's massive.
So that's showing really good studies by really top-notch Canadian researchers and doctors.
Okay.
Dr. Christine Till out of York University, Dr. Bruce Lanphier out of Simon Fraser, Rivka Green, excellent researchers, and but their studies are just being picked apart by the pro-fluoridationists. Well, there's that little thing over there wrong, and that little thing over there might not, maybe. So we can't listen to those studies. It's a freaking neurotoxin, folks. Let's not put it in our water.
I'm surprised they're getting funding for those studies. I'm surprised they haven't had all their funding pulled.
Well, that's one of the problems. And now people are attacking. They've been attacked. They actually went to the president of York University to try to get those studies withdrawn and try to get Christine Till banned from the university. They'll do anything. They'll stoop to any depths or lengths, unfortunately, to derogate people, to use pejorative lingo and language, and to vilify them and to demonize them. And like Dr. Hardy Lineback, a PhD dentist out of Toronto that used to be head of the preventative dentistry program at University of Toronto. His career was destroyed by the pro-fluoridationists when he actually, in 1998, came out and said, sorry, folks, I've gotten this all wrong. I used to be pro-fluoride, but all the studies I've been doing personally and with my colleagues, it shows that fluoride is not good. It's not very effective, and it's very unsafe. Well, they just attacked him for years and years, and finally he had to retire early to save his pension.
Wow, crazy. And so originally the fluoride was coming from as a byproduct of the aluminum smelting industry. Is that still the case where we're getting it? It's a byproduct of, it's a hazardous waste, right? Like if we were to not put it in our water, they couldn't just throw it somewhere, right? It's not legal for them to do that.
They're not allowed by strict law to put it in the land, in the air, in rivers, lakes, streams, oceans. So the only place they could put it is in like our toxic disposal plant in Swan Hills. Very expensive to do that. And so instead of spending, let's say, $5,000 a ton to dispose of it properly, this highly toxic waste, they sell it to us and they make $1,000 a ton, and they get to ship it to us and throw it in our water. And then, of course, it is not taken care of by our water treatment plant. So it goes directly back into our water systems, but they're not allowed to do in the first place by strict law. So it's a real end around.
They bypass it and it goes there anyways. It's crazy. And so it's coming from which industries now?
Well, it used to be, as I mentioned, it started with the aluminum industry. And we
Yeah.
probably still get a bit from the aluminum industry, but it's mostly the fertilizer industry out of Florida. It's huge in Florida. It's hundreds of millions of dollars to the fluoride industry out of Florida. And now, since they can't supply all of it that's needed in North America, because they've talked so many cities into fluoridating, they have to get some from China. And believe me, well, the stuff out of Florida and the stuff out of China is not filtered. It's not pharmaceutical grade. It comes with all those other toxins and
Right.
things that I was mentioning, like arsenic and lead and mercury and strontium and bromine, etc.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Well, let's move. Let's go to your PowerPoint then. So you're going to
Okay.
share the screen with us?
Yes.
Okay. So for some reason, Dr. Bob's screen is not being able to be shared right now. So we're just going to go through his presentation verbally and get some of the talking points out of there and learn a little bit more about why we do not choose to fluoridate our water.
Okay. So let me pull that up again. Okay.
Can people find this at a link, or if I can provide something down below in the show notes, I can.
I should be able to send you a link to it, I would think.
Okay, so we'll get people, you can access it there if you want to go through it yourselves, people. For now, we'll just talk about it.
So my first slide is it safe? Is it effective? Is it cost effective? And is it ethical? Those are the four biggest questions that we have with water fluoridation. Is it safe, effective, cost effective, and or ethical? I have an excellent slide here that shows that the scientific evidence keeps growing, and it shows a lot of the newest studies that have come out in the last handful of years that I alluded to earlier. Just excellent quality and just a lot of information coming out, despite the fact that the anti-fluoridationists, the safe water people, get very little funding and very little opportunity to do studies. Most of it goes to either pro-fluoridationists or to other programs. Linda Birnbaum is a PhD from the States who's the retired director of the National Toxicology Program. And her quote is, it is time to protect kids' developing brains from fluoride. This is the recently retired director of the National Toxicology Program in the United States of America that fluoridates 74% of their water. It's time to protect kids' developing brains from fluoride. And she co-wrote an op-ed, an opinion piece in Environmental Health News in October 7th of last year of 2020. And it's an excellent op-ed. It's co-authored with Dr. Christine Till out of York University and Dr. Bruce Lanphier out of Simon Fraser. And a very, very powerful op-ed. The Seattle pediatrician, who's the editor of the JAMA Pediatrics, JAMA is the Journal of American Medical Association, and it's one of the most prestigious medical journals on the planet. And the editor of that, Dr. Dimitri Christakis, said many things. He was just blown away by the quality of evidence against water fluoridation and on neurotoxicity in particular. And he said, quote, an effect that size, lowering of IQ, which is sizable, on par with that of lead. And he also said, I would not want my wife to drink fluoridated water if she were pregnant.
Wow, yeah.
So as mentioned, what we get is fluorosilicic acid or hydrofluorosilicic acid, HFSA, which comes out of the phosphate fertilizer industry, hazardous waste, contains all those other toxins like lead and arsenic that I mentioned, and even the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the States, said that there's no safe levels of lead and arsenic, and they're just about to be made to say in court that there's no safe levels of fluoride. The EPA is being taken to court by our organization, the Fluoride Action Network, and others in the States.
Oh, well, that would be pretty powerful. How do you contest that? How do you have an argument for fluoridation when there's no safe level? So that you feel is imminent, that will be coming and be declared?
it's been going on for 4 years, this court case. The EPA has tried about 6 or 7 times to have it quashed with various end arounds and various tricks, legal tricks and whatever, and they've failed each time. And so there should be a ruling coming out sometime mid this year. They were last, EPA was last put down in January, a month ago. And the judge is very impressed with the quality of evidence that's been brought out and the people that have testified on the safe water and anti-fluoridation side.
Well, that's promising.
So the next slide is a tube of toothpaste that on the back shows, in small print, of course, keep out of the reach of children under 6 years of age. If more than used for brushing is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact a poison control center right away. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Agency in the States, defines fluoride as a drug. They've admitted that it is a drug and regulates fluoride in toothpaste and pills, but it does not regulate this drug, fluoride, in water. So we're medicating patients without informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
I have another slide here from the World Health Organization that shows that decay trends all around the world, particularly in the Western world. The decay rates from about the 1960s through to the 2000s have all declined markedly in all countries, whether they're fluoridated or not. And so that data from the World Health Organization should be enough to end fluoridation right there, because it doesn't matter if you're fluoridated or not, your cavities and caries have gone down. Now that data ended at around the mid 2000s. And so recently, in the last maybe 10 years or so, cavities and caries have actually gone up. They've gone up in Calgary, but they've also gone up in Edmonton that's fluoridated, in Lethbridge that's fluoridated, in Toronto that's fluoridated. So they've gone up regardless of fluoridation or not. So there's other things going on there. And my feeling and that of most scientists and researchers are that it's mainly the power drinks that kids are drinking, the sugary drinks, the poor diets, the junk foods, the fried foods, the fast foods, all those things that, and all those contain fluoride to some extent as well. But it's mainly the sugary drinks that kids are drinking.
Well, and we know that we can heal. I actually healed a cavity forming on my son's tooth with ozonated olive oil. We know the fat-soluble vitamins. Pardon?
Yeah, there's ways to treat.
Yeah, there's ways to treat. We know diet will do it. We know there's natural substances that will do it. But I was going to ask, so what do we say to these people? Say, oh, well, so you answered my point. When people say, oh, well, look, caries are going up because when we stop fluoridation, but what they're doing is they're excluding the data from the other cities that didn't stop fluoridation, and caries are still going up. So that's interesting, because people will try to correlate that.
Here's a case in point, the way the pro-fluoridationists and the dentists work. So I won't mention her name, but a very prominent dentist who you've probably heard on the radio and maybe even on TV. In 2010, when Calgary was still fluoridated, she was on our national radio program, CBC, and she said, we have an epidemic of pediatric dental caries and cavities in Calgary. And she said, and then she went on to outline all the reasons that we have that epidemic: the poor food, the poor diets, the lack of good drinking water, on and on, lack of dental care, lack of brushing. And she outlined pretty much all the reasons why kids have more cavities and caries in 2010, while we were still fluoridated. Then in 2013, 2 years after we stopped fluoridation, the same dentist came on, it was CBC radio, I don't know if it's the same program, but on CBC national radio, and said, we have an epidemic of pediatric dental caries and cavities in Calgary. This is because we stopped water fluoridation in 2011.
Wow.
Does that make any sense to you?
No, not at all. And of course, she doesn't get challenged on that.
No, of course not. No, because CBC is in the pockets of their funders and their the people that pay their bills and do their advertising and whatever, and government, of course, which government and public health and all are pro-fluoride. So
don't we know it?
No one can
in all areas. The CBC is a disgusting organization in my eyes. They
do a lot of things wrong. They do some things right, but fluoridation is one thing they've done wrong. And they have this tiny little group of about, I don't know, 8 or 10 dentists or whatever that in a basement in this huge, massive organization called the CDC with tens of thousands of employees. This tiny little group of dentists are rabidly pro-fluoride. And so they put out that edict in 1999, just at the turn of the century, that water fluoridation is one of the top 10 miracles of the 20th century. Well, that is repeated worldwide virtually every day. I have another slide here that really outlines the number of countries not fluoridating, and that fluoridation, water fluoridation, is one of the most widely rejected practices in the world. So there's 172 countries that don't fluoridate, 24 countries that do, and only 10 countries that fluoridate more than 50% of their population in the entire world.
Wow.
I have a great picture here, a slide of a dentist with Viceroy cigarettes, and Viceroys filter the smoke. As your dentist, I would recommend Viceroys, and there's a picture of a dentist holding up his And the next slide is a doctor. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. So we've been wrong before, is my point there, and we are wrong in fluoridation as well, but we won't admit it. We're really tenaciously hanging on to this one. My next slide shows government regulations often lag behind the science. So for DDT, for instance, it was introduced in 1939 and banned in 1972. Asbestos was introduced back in the 1800s, 1890, and was banned not till 1973, and is still used in some parts of the world. Leaded gas was introduced in 1924 and was banned in 1996. DES was introduced in 1940 and banned in 1975. And of course, cigarettes are still being sold and marketed, even with some warnings and a little more carefully, but they're still a big part of our ill health in our society.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that happened in that big fluoridation forum that I mentioned with the city of Calgary in October of 2019 was that one of the pediatric emergency docs got up and showed a slide how dental surgeries had increased in Calgary by 700%. And everybody, ooh, ah. And she says, and that's been ever since we stopped fluoridation. Well, that is totally false, because if you look at this next slide, is from the Canadian Institute of Health Information. And it shows 603 dental surgeries in 2010 and 2011. And in 2011 to 2016, after we stopped water fluoridation, 495. So the dental surgeries actually went down in the years following markedly.
So where do they get their data? How did they just make it up? Who's accountable?
You can manufacture data, you know that, so they can pull things out of thin air, and that's basically what this woman must have done, because she didn't pull it out of any of the Canadian data. Mm-hmm. Very sad. So we talked about the safe and effective alternatives. I have a slide on that: regular brushing, flossing, good dental care, starting early in kids' lives, vastly improved diets through education for children and adults. The Scottish Child Smile program is an excellent model, like I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, free dental care for all marginalized and disadvantaged children. And then my last slide is just on what we can do, calls to action for people that are concerned about this. People that I would prefer, they go to safewatercalgary.com, they go to the Fluoride Action Network, which is fluoridealert.com.org, and that is in the PowerPoint as well, I believe. And go to and take action, like a petition, and email your city councilors to turn off the fluoride taps. That's the easiest thing in the world. Like if you look at Monsanto's glyphosate Roundup, mm-hmm. It's going to take decades to get that stopped, turned around, and out of our systems, out of our water, out of our bodies. Whereas with water fluoridation, you can just go and turn off the tap, and it's gone tomorrow. Right. It's the easiest thing we can do to make our health better. If you're fluoridated, if you're in a fluoridated city like Edmonton, Lethbridge, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, Toronto.
Right.
You can also educate your friends, your family, your colleagues, and you can do that by becoming more knowledgeable yourself through our websites or through any science that you want to look at. The Fluoride Action Network, FAN, it's the largest repository of fluoride information on the planet.
Oh, wow.
On the planet.
and is that an American website, the Fluoride Action
Yeah.
Network?
Yeah, Fluoride Action Network. So it's fluoridealert.org is their website.
Okay.
So you can also volunteer with our groups. We're going to need a lot of volunteers to fight this plebiscite and to get the information and the education out to the public to win this plebiscite in October. So you can volunteer with us at Safe Water Calgary. And again, if you just go to safewatercalgary.com, I spelled Calgary wrong there. safewatercalgary.com/action. That gives you all the tools that you need to become a fluoride expert and a anti-fluoride advocate.
And there's a book that I came across that I'd like to read and pick up. It's called The Fluoride Deception. Are you familiar with that book?
That is one of the best books that's ever been written on fluoridation. That's by Christopher Bryson. It came out, I believe, in 2003. He did 10 years of journalistic sleuthing and studying and putting that book together. And it reads like a spy novel. Skullduggery that goes on, and it's exciting to read, but it's truth, it's fact. And yeah, I'd highly recommend The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson. And the other good book that is a little more factual, co-authored by my friend Dr. James Beck, who helped me with the anti-fluoridation program for many years, now retired from it, so I'm the main leader in Calgary. They wrote, along with Dr. Paul Connett, who's a PhD chemist out of New York, and Dr. Meckling, who's a PhD environmentalist out of the UK, the three of them wrote the Case Against Fluoride, published in 2010, The Case Against Fluoride. Excellent book. Like, you can just read a chapter every now and then, and you'll become an expert on fluoridation as well.
Right.
So another thing that I'd like people to do, not just volunteer with us, but if they can't volunteer, say if you're too busy, you're doing all your things, family and all your action things, if you don't have the time, think of a few people that are kind of activists, or maybe they've just retired, or maybe they're not working with COVID, or that they just love taking on causes, and send them to me, and have them give them my email and have them talk to me and connect with me personally. And I'll see if they want to be a leader with us in the fluoridation movement. So you might not be able to do it yourself, but if you think of your friends and relatives and colleagues and whatever, but you can come up with 3 or 4 or 8 or 10 people that might want to take on a good cause like this. And the nice thing, it's a short-term cause too. It's only a handful of months, done by October the 18th.
Right. Okay. I know Maria Castro worked closely with you before, and I actually had her on the podcast talking about her vaccine injured son, and she's worked closely with you with the last, I think.
She still is my executive assistant, so her and I will be ramping up the petition education program here soon.
Okay.
So,
great.
Stay tuned.
He's a great warrior.
So you can also, and so another thing you can do to take action is sign that the open letter that I mentioned against fluoridation on the Fluoride Action Network site. And another important thing is encourage your dentist, your doctor, your lawyer, your therapist, whatever, to learn more, the professionals to learn more about water fluoridation, because professionals tend to just sort of rotely go along with what their professional organizations tell them to. And that's the problem we have. There's 80 or 90, they say 100 or so professional organizations that back water fluoridation. Well, that list is shrinking. It's getting smaller, slowly and steadily getting smaller. And most of the organizations, half of them don't even know that they're supporting water fluoridation. Their name is just added to that list. But the more professionals that become knowledgeable about water fluoridation, the less likely that these professional organizations that don't do any studies and know very little about water fluoridation, the less likely they will be to support it.
Right. Well, hopefully more of them are like you, who took that upon themselves as you took it upon yourself as a challenge, where these days I find that people that go to their regular doctors, they just feel that they're the experts and to not be questioned. And I feel that there's many that have this attitude of, I know, and who am I? So I really applaud your lack of ego in that, and actually taking that challenge and learning the facts and changing your mind on that, because I don't know how common that is these days.
It's not very common, unfortunately, and it should be more common. But people that do take a kind of a superficial look at the data generally go to the pro-fluoridation sites, and guess what they get there? Well, they get pro-fluoridation manipulated data. And this is a case of of distorted, twisted, buried, manipulated data, just like Big Sugar did back 40 or 50 years ago, when they buried all the science and bought new science, and then pressed the pharmaceutical industry to shift away from sugar being the bad boy, which sugar still is. And they shifted all that towards fats. And then, of course, came that implosion or explosion of cholesterol drugs like Lipitor and Crestor, and the multi-billion-dollar industry that the pharmaceutical industry manufactured out of that. That came from the sugar industry trying to whitewash their product.
Yeah.
And they did a good job of it. And the fluoride industry has done a good job of whitewashing their product too over the last, well, it's 75 years now. There's been good science for over 75 years.
Wow. Is there a way that people can remove the fluoride that might be bioaccumulated in their bodies? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes, there are ways, but I mean, you can chelate, and there's various things that you can Google to chelate heavy metals out of our body, but you don't really have to, because if you stop consuming fluoride, and that takes a bit of work, because if you're in a fluoridated area, you have to get it out of your water system to start with. You absorb it through your skin as well. You can't boil it away. It concentrates more if you boil it in water and boil some of the water off. You get more concentrated fluoride. It's in prepackaged and prepared foods a lot. So if you're eating organic foods that are not sprayed with fluoronal, I can't recall the exact name of the spray that they use to preserve fruits and vegetables that are produced in California and Mexico, then they have to keep them green and not ripened. So they spray them with this sulfonal fluoride spray. And so if you eat organic things, it's not sprayed with that. So organic foods, clean and safe water that's either reverse osmosis if you're in a fluoridated area, or just out of the tap if you're in Calgary is fine, unless you want to remove the chlorine, which is not that good for you neither. Mm-hmm. But even simple things like Britas can remove the chlorine, but they don't remove fluoride. Fluoride's a very tiny aggressive ion that's very difficult to remove.
So how does one get that out? There are special filters that will take the fluoride out, right? But you have to get, is not your regular filters. Does reverse osmosis
Reverse osmosis will take most of it out if you keep your filters changed and up to date, which is an expensive process every year. But it will take out most of the fluoride. And there's a few, like the Berkey filters will take most of the fluoride out. But again, you have to keep your filters up to speed. Right. And but most of the common ones, like the Britas, will not touch fluoride.
Right. And are there shower filters that take the fluoride out?
There are shower filters too. And again, if you make sure you change them regularly, they will take it out of your showers. But, why don't we just turn off the fluoride taps instead and not put it in?
Absolutely, for sure.
That's the easiest way.
Saves money all around if we turn off the fluoride taps, right? Saves the city money, saves you money from trying to protect yourself. It's ridiculous that we would even have to think about doing that.
It would seem like a no-brainer, and that's why I say we have common sense on our side.
Yeah. Common sense. Ooh, I'm waiting for it to prevail in many areas, actually.
As they say, common sense is not that common.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And lastly, for the fluoride displaces iodine in the thyroid, right? Like for people with hypothyroid, that could be a huge problem. So I would think people with thyroid conditions should be aware of their iodine intake to maintain healthy levels in the thyroid.
Exactly. The latest study I saw showed about 19% of Canadians have low iodine, and so therefore are very susceptible to fluoride, more susceptible than the average person would be.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I remember working with a client years ago when I was starting in nutrition consulting. They had a thyroid issue. It was still before the fluoride was taken out of it. And she said something really happened with her fluoride, and I had suggested that to her, and she had moved recently from a non-fluoridated area to our city. So that made sense. So, okay. Well, so there's lots that we can do, lots of things. And first and foremost, I think all of us need to arm ourselves with information. So we're going to put all these links into the notes, the book recommendation, your PowerPoint. If we could get access to that somehow, I can put that in there and click link to that. Is there any last things? What about fluorosis, dental fluorosis? Is there a way, Is that
Oh,
reversible?
yeah, we didn't touch on that. I just mentioned that it's bad for teeth, but dental fluorosis has been skyrocketing in the States because, as I mentioned, they're about 74% fluoridated. And so it's not just water fluoridation. Water fluoridation is the main part of getting too much fluoride into your body. So fluorosis, damage to the teeth, is a sign of fluoride toxicity. You're also getting it from all the other things I mentioned too, the drinks, the prepared foods, and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But fluorosis is a mottling or speckling of teeth. And it comes from having too much fluoride when you're either in the placenta or when you're just a very young baby or infant or a young child before 5 years of age. And so the vast majority of fluorosis damage, those spots on the teeth, are not totally harmful to kids, that they're cosmetic. But you try to tell a teenager that has spotted teeth that it's no problem, it's just cosmetic, it's good for you. I don't think you're going to get a very good response from them. But now, as it's becoming more and more common, there's up to 20% of fluorosis is actually moderate to even severe. Severe is maybe 2 to 3, 4%. You get severe fluorosis, it tears your teeth apart. It just breaks them down, damages them, that turns them brown and black, and your teeth are destroyed. That's a very small percentage. But moderate fluorosis, where you have some very obvious specks and spots and damage, is more and more common. Now, some of those can be treated, mild and moderate can be treated with fluoride sulfadiamine, I believe is the name of it. It's something that the dentist can spot onto a fluorosis or onto a new cavity even to prevent new cavities. They can also scrape off some of the superficial fluorosis, but most often it's permanent damage to the teeth.
And so what comes to mind for me is that's something you can see. What about what's going on in the bones? What about
Exactly.
yeah.
So you can't see it. And so that's why I say that fluorosis is the first visible sign of whole body toxicity. That means you definitely have too much.
Right.
And,
Absolutely.
and it's up as high as some studies from the CDC, the data from the CDC shows, and from the NHANES popular study in the States of all the population, it shows as high as 60% of teenagers now have fluorosis. So mild,
That's
moderate,
a
severe.
lot.
Huge. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So we don't need it. It's not safe. It's expensive. It causes harm. Yeah,
It's not ethical.
it's not ethical. So, but yet here we are again. And to
Again,
think how many actually have it. But when we look at the rest of the world, that's really good stats to have those numbers with the different countries and to show that we are not alone in fighting this fight. So that's really good.
we're not an outlier.
No, absolutely not. So, okay. So anything else? I think that's some really great information to help educate.
We've covered a lot of bases here, Sasha. Thank you for your questions and for quarterbacking this. And I think if we can get this information out to a lot of people, it's just going to make a difference. And hopefully we'll get some more volunteers to help us with this plebiscite educational drive. Actually, I suggested to city councilors, I believe that they're still wrestling with what the question will be. And probably the question would be something like, are you in favor of reinstating water fluoridation? But I think the question should be, are you in favor of adding a known neurotoxin to our public water that can save 1/2 to 1 cavity a lifetime in kids? And I could also put in there, are you in favor of adding a neurotoxin that is equivalent in toxicity to lead and saves 1/2 to 1
There's a good
cavity?
one. Everybody knows that lead is toxic, right?
Yeah.
That's a very easy answer.
So I suggested that be their question, but I don't think they're going to go for that.
Yeah, probably not. Well, and if anybody else is dealing with this in your city, if you're listening to this from somewhere, I've got people listening from all over the place, check out safewatercalgary.com and see what you can do. Get the information out there. If you don't have an organization already created to help remove the fluoride out of your water system, then arm yourself with information and get a movement going. This is the only, other than all we have, I mean, a ton of pharmaceuticals in our water because people are peeing them out and dumping them and everything else. But this is the one that you said, it's mandated, it's putting it in there that we knowingly are putting in there. and we don't get a choice. And it's crazy. Like the idea, I mean, to mandate these things, other mandates we're dealing with these days as well, it just carte blanche. It's crazy to do that. So definitely worth your
And
time.
it's pretty easy to get a group up and running too. And we'll help you at Safe Water Calgary if we can. Fluoride Action Network is a great support organization for anybody that wants to start a group and get something running, like in Edmonton or Lethbridge or wherever. They're a very good resource and a good support.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, Dr. Bob, thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending that time with me. It's important work, so thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much for your support, Sasha. Much appreciated.
No, my pleasure.